Hey, it's Laura Reagan from Therapy Chat Podcast and Trauma Chat Podcast and Trauma Therapist Network. Coming here to let you know that if you're a trauma therapist or a therapist who works with clients who have trauma, even if you don't identify as a trauma therapist, you don't have any certifications, you may not have had formal training in trauma therapy, but you use a trauma focused approach in your work, then I want you to know that Trauma Therapist Network membership is open now for new members. Early access is for people who are on the waiting list, and you can join the waiting list now, and we'll send you the registration link so you can join at a discounted rate between now and June 19th, 2023. We will be offering a discounted rate that you'll keep for the lifetime of your membership, and you can cancel at any time. On the 20th, we're opening up registration to everyone, and there will be a discount on your first month, but it's not the same low rate that you will get if you join now. So if this is something you've been waiting for, if you need support, you want connection, you enjoy case consultation, you want to learn cutting edge neuroscience informed approaches to working with attachment, trauma, and dissociation, then Trauma Therapist Network is a place for you, and we would love to welcome you in. There's 3 tiers of membership. You can learn all about it by going to go.traumatherapistnetwork.com/join. That will take you to the waiting list, and from there, you can sign up for the waiting list, and you'll receive an email with the link to register and that discount code. I hope to see you in the community. I love cooking, but I often find that by the end of the workday, I draw a blank when thinking about what to make for dinner. That's why I love HelloFresh. They have a variety of interesting recipes, so I'm not eating the same thing week after week because I can't think of anything new to cook. HelloFresh cares about quality. That's why their seasonal ingredients are picked at peak ripeness and travel from the farm to your home in less than 7 days, so you know they're fresh. And they do more than just delicious dinners. Not only can you take your pick from 40 weekly recipes, but you can choose from over 100 items to round out your order, from snacks and easy lunches to desserts and pantry necessities. Everything arrives in one box on a delivery day you choose, and you can try it for free. Go to hellofresh.com/chat16 and use code chat16 for 16 free meals plus free shipping. That's hellofresh.com/chat16. When you use code chat16, you can get 16 free meals plus free shipping. Try HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. Therapy Chat Podcast, episode 385.
This is the Therapy Chat Podcast with Laura Reagan, LCSWC. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Laura Reagan, LCSWC.
This week's episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes, the #1 rated electronic health record system available today. With live telephone support 7 days a week, it's clear why Therapy Notes is rated 4.9 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot and has a 5-star rating on Google. Therapy Notes makes billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth incredibly easy. And now, for all you prescribers out there, Therapy Notes is proudly introducing ePrescribe. Use coupon code CHAT or click the link in the show notes to get 2 free months at therapynotes.com. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan, and today I'm very excited to bring you an interview that I recorded several months ago, and a couple things have changed. For example, I said in the interview that I'm not on TikTok, but now I am on TikTok at Therapy Chat Pod. I'd love for you to follow me there if you want to. I'm sharing video content from these interviews often. Many of them were recorded with the intention of being released only in audio, so you will not see them in video format. But if the guest agrees, then the video, some clips from the video are going to be posted there too. And I really find it fun. It's fun to get snippets of the interviews to give you more of a sense of what they're about. So anyway, I'm having a little bit of fun on TikTok, getting more comfortable being on video. And what we are talking about today is, well, first let me tell you about my guest. Today's guest is someone who I've been following on Instagram for a while, and I really began to appreciate how she shared in a very human way about her own experiences being a therapist who has complex PTSD. I also identify as a therapist with complex PTSD. She talks about what it was like for her and what it is like for her now in her life. She talks about this on Instagram, and I think it really normalizes our human emotions and experiences and the ways we cope following traumatic experiences. Today's guest is Dr. Han Ren. She's a psychologist based in Austin, Texas, and the owner of a group practice called Pivot Psychology. And she has a very popular Instagram account, and she's also on TikTok, which I will also link to. Now that I'm on TikTok, I'll link to her TikTok. And Han talks about liberation-focused psychology, anti-carceral movements, and she explains what those concepts mean and how you can learn more. She shares some Instagram accounts that she follows that speak on these topics. She talks about how the traditional medical model that so many therapists learned in school is really oftentimes shaming of ways that people attempt to survive through traumatic experiences. And she talks about why she does things differently. One of the themes that we cover here is how therapy can be very focused on simply changing behavior and not at getting to the root of the problem. And so many of our training programs are the same way, even for therapists. So as a therapist, if you are in case consultation and you want to learn how to respond when a client says this, or what to do when you feel that, or how to hold a boundary in a therapy session. And the reality is there is what to say, what to do. Someone can tell you those things, but if you're having a reaction, if it's hard for you to set a boundary in a therapy session, it's probably because you're having some kind of reaction. There's some kind of reenactment happening for you that, of course, I mean, we have to learn. We, as therapists, we have to learn what a framework is to be a therapist and what the expectations are and how we do our jobs. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when we have stuck places, you can get supervision or consultation where the supervisor or consultant tells you, oh, if this happens, then you could say this and maybe do some role plays. But the real work is figuring out what is coming up that is stopping you from knowing what to do. Because you have the training already, but when you can't access your cognitive brain, it means you're having a reaction in some way. So just like what she's talking about in what's going on with clients, the same is happening within the therapist, again, because we're human. So one of the things that she talked about in this conversation is how changing the surface behavior may be a goal. It may be necessary, especially if the person is feeling suicidal or is doing something that is so harmful and risky that it puts their safety at such risk that something has to be done to help them stop that behavior. Sure, that is real. But if we don't try to understand the function that the behavior is serving, for example, using the coping strategy of what people call, quote, self-mutilation, self-harming behaviors, things like cutting, burning, doing other things that put the person at risk. But what's the benefit that this behavior is providing to them? Because there is one. There's a reason why they're doing it. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep doing it. It's helping them in some way. I'm not saying that we want people to do things that harm themselves. I'm saying that we need to understand that these are adaptive strategies. She talks about how these Band-Aid approaches where we just tell someone to stop doing a certain behavior lead to shame. They reinforce shame. And oftentimes there's another behavior that takes its place. For example, when people, you hear this all the time, when people stop drinking and then they gain weight because they're using food to cope instead of using alcohol to cope. The problem is that they can't cope, not how they try to cope, right? So we need a deeper excavation of what's really going on inside. And that's true for clients and therapists. So she talks about how therapists can inadvertently do harm and promote clients hiding certain information and masking during therapy sessions. How does that help anyone heal? It doesn't. If they're performing for you so that you can feel better that they're not doing a self-destructive behavior anymore, then maybe there's some benefit within the therapeutic relationship, but the person doesn't have the opportunity to actually learn how to change the behavior by addressing its function and finding another way that meets that need more effectively and more safely, and overcoming the barriers to being able to use those more safe, effective strategies. In fact, I'll just say they may not be effective. They may not be as effective at first. So I loved our conversation. We got a lot more in depth than what I'm describing here, but I really appreciate what Han is doing, how she's using social media to provide psychoeducation and normalize the feelings that people have when they are trauma survivors, neurodivergent. She speaks of a lot of various identities that impact herself and her audience. So I highly recommend checking out her Instagram account and her TikTok. And if you're a therapist yourself and you need a place where you can examine the stuck places that you're confronted with in your work with clients who have trauma or clients who you don't realize have trauma, then check out Trauma Therapist Network. Registration is currently open for new members. If you're on the waiting list, you should have received an email inviting you to register with early access and a special discount. So keep your eyes out for that. If you're not on the waiting list, you can still join the waiting list, and I'll send you that registration link. Registration will be open for a few weeks in June 2023, and then we'll open it back up again, probably just once more in 2023 for new members. But group practice memberships are always open, and we're always keeping it open for Canadian therapists because we have the ability to accept Canadian therapists, and we only have one Canadian therapist right now. So would love to have more Canadian therapists join. There's no shortage of need across Canada, that's for sure. And I know there are so many wonderful Canadian therapists. I met many in Mexico back in February. Thanks, as always, for listening to Therapy Chat. I would be very grateful if you like Therapy Chat, if you tell someone about it, or go to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. Let people know why you like it, or put a rating on your favorite podcast player wherever you listen. And I just appreciate you. Thanks so much for being here. I'm grateful to be able to create this show. Talk to you soon. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan, and today I'm so happy to be speaking with someone who I've wanted to talk to for a while, Dr. Han Ren.
Hi.
Han, thank you for coming on to Therapy Chat today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I'm excited. I first started following your work on Instagram, ironically. It seems ironic to find out about a psychologist through Instagram, but you make a lot of content on Instagram that's really helpful for people to learn about mental health. So I'm excited to talk to you about that and to get into something about a particular post that you had. But before we even go there, will you just start off by telling our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So I'm Dr. Han Ren. I'm a licensed psychologist based in Austin, Texas, where I have a group private practice called Pivot Psychology. I specialize in working with overthinking, overachievers, anxiety, perfectionism, a lot of racial identity development and racial trauma in children of immigrants. And in the past few years, I've been really leaning into liberation psychology and anti oppressive and anti racist ways of practicing our clinical work. And it's been such a fun journey, a lot of richness in being able to exist online and speak with people like you and share this work with others.
Yes, well, your voice is really making a difference, and I'm so grateful for what you're doing. Let's, if you will you tell our audience a little bit more about really what liberation psychology is? Because yeah, I think that's a newer phrase and a lot of people might not be familiar with it.
Yeah. So liberation psychology is psychology by the oppressed for the oppressed. So it really takes into account the systems of power and oppression under which we live, takes into account, the more systemic roles that influence individual mental health. So it's zooming out from this idea that, mental health is an individual biocycle model of, personal failings or individual psychopathology. Liberation psychology takes into the idea of community care and collective care and how our identities and a social location have huge influences on our mental health and wellness.
That's wonderful. What a great thing that this field is expanding in that way.
Yeah, I think it's necessary, we are really needing this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And, I'm a social worker, and obviously, social work is still part of the system, the institutions, and we have, our whole mental health system is influenced by the patriarchal white supremacist structures.
Yeah.
So, but I always think psychology is like it's so brain focused and individual focused.
Mhm.
And I love that there's a section of psychology that's more about the environment that the person is in, like that. That's what that's what they say with social work. It's person and environment.
I think it's, as a woman of color, like it's so hard to just only see it as top down brain focused when, my own personal lived experiences has been so colored by the environment.
Yeah. And that makes me think about another layer of what we were going to talk about because so the topic that I wanted to discuss with you, it came up because I was on Instagram and I saw a video you made and you were actually it was like a response. This is so this sounds like such a strange thing, but it was an Instagram video, a reel that you made that was in response to a TikTok post that you had that had like been really, I think kind of had gone viral, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you tell what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was a trend where, you make kind of like some hot takes about whatever your field is or whatever your niche is. And one of the things that I had said was there's no such thing as maladaptive coping. It all serves to keep you alive. And so I had some commenters respond saying, well, you're just enabling. You are going to cause someone to overdose because they think that it's okay because you said that, there's no such thing as maladaptive coping. And just kind of really like, I guess, either people in recovery or like addiction purists or old school purists. I wouldn't say it's really the common vibe anymore in addiction treatment these days, but just some really rigid ideas about, having to like excise certain behaviors from our lives.
Yeah. So like certain things are bad and you should never do them. And there's no way that they could ever serve a purpose that would be adaptive, so to speak.
And you should feel shame for having done them and like continue to use shame as a vehicle or
Motivation.
tool, yeah, to keep you from doing them again.
Yeah. But what we know really is that shaming the things that someone's doing to survive really kind of just makes them feel worse and
It backfires.
yeah,
Doesn't work.
perpetuates it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess sometimes people do respond to shame in the short term that they will, oh, I shouldn't do this. It's bad. And that will be enough to make them not do it. But
Comes out in a different way. Comes
yes,
out sideways, in some way over time. It's not a sustainable long-term solution for healing and growth. Maybe for behavior change, but not actual holistic healing and growth as a person.
right. Because even I think in a way there's a parallel with that to something I see a lot with trauma survivors. My clients are trauma survivors. I'm not directly working with clients now, but that's been the population that I've always worked with is people with complex trauma. And it's people with childhood trauma and they escape childhood and they get into somehow a more stable situation, whether it's a relationship that, takes them away or education and job and achievement takes them from this chaos that they had before, but it still comes out in other ways,
Yeah.
whether it's chaos, whether it's relational problems, self loathing,
Yeah. The
personal.
chronic shame.
Yeah. It's like whack a mole. It's like you find one way to stuff it down, but it pops up somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what you were posting about so I'm not on TikTok, but the Instagram post that I saw where you were responding to the TikTok, you talked about how you see those, what people call maladaptive behaviors or self destructive behaviors differently. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think every single thing we have done in our lives to survive has been adaptive. Maybe some are more adaptive than others, and maybe some also cause harm to ourselves in a different way while we're trying to survive and save ourselves from the most salient or emergent threat. And if we are only so focused on the excavation or excising of that behavior, then we lose the function of what this behavior is serving to protect. And, so in this reel, I had self disclosed how in my teenage years, I had self harmed as a primary way of coping with a lot of chaos and complex trauma. And I went to some therapists who were very, hard line about like, you need to stop this self-mutilative behavior immediately and like, you know, very punishing of it. And so I was scared and shamed and, spent a lot of energy and effort to just stop that behavior. And I did, but it took a different form. It didn't actually help address the chronic shame underneath or the function of why I was doing it. And it just sublimated it to something that was more societally acceptable and more palatable to, people's, I guess, like therapist code of ethics or, what people were willing to put up with me. And
Oh,
so it, yeah, I mean, so it's like the function of it shifted, but the, you know, shame didn't. And it was another few decades of really working through and understanding, what are the core features of why I do these things, whether it's quote unquote, self destructive, like self injury, or like, still also self destructive, but like capitalistic and productive, right? Through like overachievement, overwork, perfectionism, because that's really what I turned to instead. And everyone celebrated these elements, but it was still just as destructive for me personally. And recognizing like it's all the same foundation and, you know, being able to honor the function of why I do any of the things, why anyone does any of the things that they do is such a core element to healing and growth.
yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just have so many thoughts and feelings about what you shared. Because, well, I guess I'll go with the feelings first because that's what seems to be coming up. Is when I saw your post, I was very moved because I saw it and I thought, wow, if someone had been able to explain that to me when I was a teenager, I can't imagine how much different I would have felt. I mean, I'm 50 years old, but and my life is much different, but 35 years of like, so it's not to say that your Instagram made me realize for the first time because I'm a therapist and I
Yeah,
do
right, right,
know
right.
these
Yeah.
things, but it just hit me because it was like, wow, how as a teen, if an adult who you are going to help you, like you're hurting your body because you feel bad inside for some reason. And there's a good reason why you feel that way. And you're trying to survive this. So you go to an adult helping professional and they say this person's going to help you feel better or this person's going to fix you, whatever they tell you. And then you go and then they say, you can't do these things. These are very bad things. You are a very sick person. This is very bad. You have to stop or you won't be able to come here. And then you're like, oh no, I'm so messed up.
There was a period in my teen years when I was, like, really in the throes of it where I thought, like, "You know what? I'm just gonna become an institutionalized person because I am so messed up. I don't deserve to, like, have a regular
Oh
life. Like, I
man.
cannot be safe out in the wild." That was the feeling that I had, was like, either I'm going to not make it because I'm that messed up, or if I do, I'm gonna need to be, like, so severely contained because that is the only way that I can be safe. And
It's like
it
you're
was
afraid of
such
yourself in a
yeah.
way.
Oh, yeah. I was terrified of myself. And, as an extension of that, I became terrified of
Hey, it's Laura Reagan from Therapy Chat Podcast and Trauma Chat Podcast and Trauma Therapist Network. Coming here to let you know that if you're a trauma therapist or a therapist who works with clients who have trauma, even if you don't identify as a trauma therapist, you don't have any certifications, you may not have had formal training in trauma therapy, but you use a trauma focused approach in your work, then I want you to know that Trauma Therapist Network membership is open now for new members. Early access is for people who are on the waiting list, and you can join the waiting list now, and we'll send you the registration link so you can join at a discounted rate between now and June 19th, 2023. We will be offering a discounted rate that you'll keep for the lifetime of your membership, and you can cancel at any time. On the 20th, we're opening up registration to everyone, and there will be a discount on your first month, but it's not the same low rate that you will get if you join now. So, if this is something you've been waiting for, if you need support, you want connection, you enjoy case consultation, you want to learn cutting edge neuroscience informed approaches to working with attachment, trauma, and dissociation, then Trauma Therapist Network is a place for you, and we would love to welcome you in. There's 3 tiers of membership. You can learn all about it by going to go.traumatherapistnetwork.com/join. That will take you to the waiting list, and from there, you can sign up for the waiting list, and you'll receive an email with the link to register and that discount code. I hope to see you in the community.
just being alone, like, even at this age, I'm finally learning to, like, enjoy my own company sometimes and, like, feel a little safer in that because there was such an idea of, like, you cannot be trusted. You cannot be alone or else you're going to self-destruct.
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, the way you're describing that is so powerful. And just to think of how, really thinking of those words, how terrifying that is because you can't escape yourself.
Right? You can distract from yourself, you can suppress parts of yourself, but ultimately, that's probably the most important relationship we have with anybody is our relationship with ourselves.
Yeah. I was actually thinking yesterday, your relationship with yourself is the only relationship that you're guaranteed to have your whole entire life. There's no other relationship that you can be sure that will stay with you.
So you have to
So,
evolve in your relationship with
yeah,
yourself too.
being able to love yourself, you have yourself for your whole life, but being afraid of yourself and being almost taught to hate yourself when you're already kind of in that space anyway, and to fear your urges that are the only thing that are keeping you going at the time. So, yeah, this really fits closely with what we've been talking about on Therapy Chat. I mean, I think it's always about depathologizing trauma therapy and healing, but I think that we therapists can do a lot of harm, probably out of our own fear and lack of competency in knowing how to help, not only in understanding what we're seeing in front of us as trauma and attachment wounds that are causing the person to behave the way they do, but in the way we have these knee jerk reactions to our clients sharing something that they haven't told other people because they're too afraid to tell, or, they haven't known what else to do. So they need help. And then they're told, you are a really big problem.
I really do think about just the movement towards anti-carceral abolitionist mental health care as, so necessary, and, how that applies to every single level, and how when we are only guided by, like a CYA, like cover your ass type of, what are my ethics and my, you know, mandatory responding, reporting duties, like what do I need to like check the boxes of? How much care gets missed in that and just what falls between the cracks. And sure, like you have done everything you needed to do to ensure that your license is solid and, you have checked the boxes, but what does that do to your relationship? What does that tell the person that you're trying to help? How does that influence how sneaky they are or secretive or alone that they feel? There's such a ripple effect to just by the books type of care that it's not even care anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. As soon as if you're sitting with your client and they say, I was thinking about killing myself last night, they're telling you, I felt the worst you can possibly feel. And you go, listen, I'm going to need you to sign this safety contract right now. I mean, that's not what they needed in that moment. It's also not, they're not effective anyway. And it's a rupture to
It is.
the relationship.
And I think about, how the power differential between the therapist and the
Yeah.
client is so stark, in that way too. And that's another motivation for me to self-disclose is that like as a therapist, as someone with a, platform, I can be honest and vulnerable and say like, I've been there. I've struggled through this extensively. And my experiences does not make me worse of a clinician. It makes me better of a clinician. And I can approach this from both a professional, experience, clinical experience, but also a lived experience perspective. And that really does add a layer of like, depathologizing and, empathy to the experience.
Running a group private practice has been a challenging and rewarding experience, and one thing that has made it so much easier is Therapy Notes. Therapy Notes makes billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth incredibly easy. If you're coming from another EHR, like I did, Therapy Notes makes the transition incredibly easy, importing your demographic data free of charge so you can get going right away. My team has found Therapy Notes very easy to learn, it's intuitive, the customer support is second to none, and that's one of of the things that has kept me a Therapy Notes customer for several years now. Anytime I've needed to contact Therapy Notes for help with an issue I couldn't figure out on my own, I've been able to get through to someone and resolve the issue within 15 minutes, 99% of the time. Find out what more than 100,000 mental health professionals already know. Try Therapy Notes for 2 months absolutely free. Just click on the link in the show notes or enter the promo code CHAT at therapynotes.com.
That's so true. And I'm torn right now because there's two directions I want to go. There's two questions. I mean, one, I want to ask you, I'm going to come back to something I wanted to ask you to say more about, and I'll just first respond to what you just said. So I think it's so brave to share your experience. And I am personally in awe of the current movement to really stop hiding the fact that we are human as therapists. You know, I'm seeing more
Mhm.
and more therapists coming forward and saying, I have DID and I'm a therapist
Mhm.
and I'm practicing. And no, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be, or I have a dissociative disorder, or I have PTSD, or I have chronic illness. And, I think a lot of times it's like the best we'll do is say, I used to have this problem and I overcame it and you can too, you know? But I don't know if it ties in. I guess that's why I was torn, how it may tie into the anti-carceral
Mhm.
abolitionist healthcare movement that you mentioned, to be more forthright about, like, there's no us and them. There's no
Yeah.
expert and, non-expert. We're doing this together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's such a collaborative nature to this. And it's an idea, within liberation psychology of accompaniment as being a key element of what drives change and what, is healing. Like the vulnerability and privilege of bearing witness to each other's pains and life experiences and the reciprocity that it requires. And that does flatten the hierarchy, and it, necessitates a commitment to relationship over time. And I think that's part of the most beautiful elements of this is that you can grow and deepen this reciprocal trust and care. I mean, obviously with boundaries and like, not like willy-nilly working all this
Sure.
stuff out in session. But I think just be more open to this idea as being a relationship is a key element of anti-carceral care.
Yeah. Where can we learn more about that concept? Do you have a resource or a book or anything to recommend? I'm sure it's not just like one thing, but
Yeah, there's some
not to put
great
you on the spot.
websites that I've been loving. I like Project Let's is a great one. Fireweed Collective, Dr. Jenny WH. She is an abolitionist therapist who creates social media content and it's really good. Another one is Body Justice Therapist. She's also is a body justice therapist. She's also anti-carceral. And then there's the CAMS, which I think is really good. It's a suicide assessment tool, but it's very collaborative and wraparound.
Is it the CANS?
Yes, CAMS care. So collaborative assessment and management of suicidality.
Okay, that's a different one than I was thinking of.
And it's therapeutic. It's an assessment tool, but it's also a therapeutic framework. And, I really love how Fireweed Collective has done a lot of great trainings, and I think they've collaborated with the Barnard Society for Women's Studies. I'm like,
Hmm.
you're gonna really have to like look into like edit all this stuff out. I don't know.
I'll put some
But there's
links in the show
yeah,
notes.
but there's like an idea of like mad mapping and like creating emotional safety maps where it's not just like okay, this contract or like the Brown Stanley template of safety planning. It's like, okay, who are your people who can like bring you a meal, pick up your meds? Like, how do you want to be cared for? And what do you need in these times of crisis? And how do you, create that map and web, proactively so that people can care for you in the ways that you need and deserve. And so just a lot of like mutual aid collaborative care stuff that, decenters like psychiatric facilities as like the next step.
Yes. Well, thank you. And also, I mean, because if I'm just thinking, I have so many thoughts. One of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about, quote, self mutilation, thinking about like clients who use cutting, for example. And so it's like, don't cut. And then every session, it's like, I wanted to cut, but I didn't cut. I wanted to cut, but I didn't cut. And, which is good that, they're paying attention and noticing the urge and working with what's triggering it and what did you do instead and all that stuff. But it becomes like, what are you doing is you're just in a battle with the cutting in the sessions, and that's it.
You're in a power struggle.
Yeah.
You're not understanding it. You're not understanding the emotions that surround it and the function of what it offers you, and really expanding on, growing curious to what that process does. And like sometimes in order to really understand it, you just got to do it with like all cylinders firing, with a degree of observation and connectedness to your
Being
body.
more mindful. Yeah.
Yeah, mindfulness. Yeah. But that like you would never hear a therapist say that because it like, is complicit to you doing it.
Yeah.
And like, what does that mean? Right. So, but there's so much we can learn about ourselves when we kind of move with resistance or move with the trauma and what it, how it perpetuates or shows up in its current form, rather than just to say like, stop it now.
Right. This is the thing that we must avoid at all costs. And I just think about too how like there's like this, it's hard to put into words, but I feel like there's this like feeling of performing and people pleasing for the therapist by not doing it. And then, and then there's this big shame thing if they do relapse. And in the same way, just to take that another step, it's like, I didn't want to tell you I was feeling suicidal because I knew you would make me go to the hospital. And it's like, make me go to the hospital, And then you go to the hospital and then they keep you there for a few days to keep you safe and maybe make a change in medications, maybe. And then you're back home and you're like, well, now I should be fine because I've been to the hospital and nothing happened.
That way, right? Yeah. And like, how does that
There's no
replicate our
treatment.
Existing power differentials and the systems of oppression that we live under, especially if you have any marginalized identity? How much of our life is spent trying to please the stakeholders and the power holders enough so we can skate by to another day? And it's just these, parallel processes that get replicated time and again, and we lose ourselves in it. We forget why. Like, what's the point if it's just, a symptom reduction for one more day?
Right. Exactly. Or moment. Just as long as you don't say that you feel that way anymore while we're in our therapy session, then I can rest easy tonight. Like, that's not what it's all about, right? I mean, we're trying to help people feel better. And I love what you were saying about, and this sort of, I guess there's a contrast between, you mentioned that in your Instagram reel that when you went to this therapist and they found out that you had been using self-harm, they were like, I think you said, all right, we're going to start DBT, or they referred you to DBT.
They gave me the DSM printout of borderline personality disorder on my second session. And I was 15. So like, there's so much that's wrong with that.
Yeah.
But it was just like so pathologizing and so just like reductionistic. And there's like no way. I mean, all 15-year-olds are a little extra. And,
I mean, kind of what
session,
borderline
right?
personality disorder is behaving kind of the way a teenager behaves. So being a teenager.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're behaving the way a teenager behaves.
And I think there's, some research that looks into like early traits, but like certainly by a second session, it's really hard to discern all of that out, right? And even if you do have an idea of that's what it is, like to hand that to a 15-year-old
Not
and say like, this
relational.
is what you have, right? No, it was terrifying. Like it really solidified my idea of like, well, okay, well, I guess I'm going to be institutionalized because that's what I see for myself based on this. It was really, really scary, but
Yeah.
it served to like shock me.
It's like a, yeah, wake up call, but not in the right way. It just shocked you into a change.
Yeah, yeah, it was terrifying. It's like, well, if I want to have any sort of, freedom or agency in my life, let alone in my, therapy, I got to excise this. I got to completely remove this part of myself.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. And
Thank
again,
you.
that I keep going back to it and asking you about it again is maybe not the greatest.
No, that's okay. I've done a lot of work around it since then, and like, I actually feel really good about talking about it because it's part of this normalization, destigmatizing, de-shaming process.
Yes. Thank you. There, I was pathologizing it for a second there. Sorry about that. Yeah. So let's talk about that, those types of treatments, like the behaviorally based treatments in when people are dealing with psychic pain from trauma. How do you work with those concerns when they come up for your clients? It's clear that it would be a completely different framework.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to not work with people who are in like acute crisis. And I think there is something to be said about like stabilization, emotional regulation skills, and, the times of acute crisis.
Yeah,
But, even a person who's not in acute crisis, there's often a thin line of what would set them over that edge,
that's
right? When
true.
life gets stressful or whatever else. And so when you're working with that baseline, how do you incorporate all the parts of that person and recognize that they all have a healing, adaptive role? It's like very parts work, internal family systems stuff, but also
Hmm.
just like, what are you understanding about your body and what your body is trying to tell you? So I work very much from like a nervous system regulation perspective and from a like, this has served you and this was a solution and now it's a problem. And let's, keep watching and seeing what it's trying to tell you. Let's grow curious about it over time. And, it's longer term work because we're not trying to change things, overnight. And it's sometimes a little bit of riskier work because, people can do more things and tell me about the things that they're doing because we have created that safety. But it over time allows people to come to their own like realizations about like, okay, well, this is where that part comes from.
Hmm.
And this is what it served back then. And maybe it no longer serves me now. And I can catch it when it comes online and choose something different. And all of that involves so many rounds of repetition. And like with each repetition, just some stabilizing, compassion, nurturing, like, and it's okay that you're doing this and it's okay. You're not too much. And I think there's something really beautiful about that, just in my therapy work as a client, as a clinician, and also in my own life of just really wanting to surround myself with people who are like, well, okay, you're a lot, but it's okay. You're not too much.
You're a lot, but it's okay. Not too much.
Yeah. It's probably like the biggest, like the best words of affirmation anyone can say to me is just that like, you're always enough and never too much.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's what, I feel that when you talk about the way you practice, it's like if you make the space for the person to bring all of themselves into the therapeutic relationship with you, then they can explore what's really happening and why in a holding, environment.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't have to lie. They don't have to
Right.
feel
Hide
ashamed.
things,
Hmm.
lie. Right. And so that in itself is a completely different experience when, you know, if you feel intolerably unsafe and you have to do things to escape from that feeling, you'll do whatever you have to do to escape, you know?
By any means necessary.
Yeah. So if we make it so that people can't tell us about some of the things they do, then how will they be able to understand why they do those things and change it?
Yeah. And like compartmentalization is such a core element of trauma and
Yeah.
what perpetuates trauma, right? When people are just completely different versions of themselves in different settings and don't feel the safety to integrate, and like how that is related to our identities and the masking that we have to do to feel acceptable and safe in different settings. And so if we can create some experience of integration and allowance for just being who you are in the therapy room, you know, just the gift of generalization that that could offer someone.
Yeah. Very true. And I mean, what you're doing with social media is really important because,
Thank you.
it's people, that's where people can find, they can find it on their own. They can think about it. Oh, never knew a therapist could say that, you know?
Yeah. It's just been really an honor and a privilege to be able to do that and to, have networks with other therapists who have similar values and be able to offer some, workshops and trainings to like have other therapists also develop these ideas. Like the community building element of social media has been so life-giving and nourishing and, beyond what I could have possibly imagined when I started.
Oh, that's so great. And, I say this a lot, but we always look at social media as a negative thing and what it takes and how it harms. But there are aspects of it that you can only get through social media. And I mean, I doubt I would have found you without it.
Uh-huh.
And I'm so grateful that we've connected.
Yeah, me too.
So, Han, where can people find your speaking, your trainings, events, your therapy practice, all the good stuff you're doing?
Yeah, my website is drhanren.com, and you can also find me on TikTok and Instagram as Dr. Han Ren. And my group practice is pivotpsychologyatx.com, and we're based in Austin and have several clinicians who are seeing people within the state of Texas.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for bringing your wisdom to Therapy Chat today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such an honor.
The pleasure was all mine.
Thank you to Therapy Notes for sponsoring this week's episode. I do love Therapy Notes. It's such an asset to my business and makes my job as a practice owner and a therapist much easier. Try it today with no strings attached to see why everyone is switching to Therapy Notes, now featuring ePrescribe. Use coupon code CHAT or click the link in the show notes to get 2 free months at therapynotes.com.
Thank you for listening to Therapy Chat with your host, Laura Reagan, LCSWC. For more information, please visit therapychatpodcast.com.
Hey, it's Laura Reagan from Therapy Chat Podcast and Trauma Chat Podcast and Trauma Therapist Network. Coming here to let you know that if you're a trauma therapist or a therapist who works with clients who have trauma, even if you don't identify as a trauma therapist, you don't have any certifications, you may not have had formal training in trauma therapy, but you use a trauma-focused approach in your work, then I want you to know that Trauma Therapist Network membership is open now for new members. Early access is for people who are on the waiting list, and you can join the waiting list now, and we'll send you the registration link so you can join at a discounted rate between now and June 19th, 2023. We will be offering a discounted rate that you'll keep for the lifetime of your membership, and you can cancel at any time. On the 20th, we're opening up registration to everyone, and there will be a discount on your first month, but it's not the same low rate that you will get if you join now. So if this is something you've been waiting for, if you need support, you want connection, you enjoy case consultation, you want to learn cutting edge neuroscience informed approaches to working with attachment, trauma, and dissociation, then Trauma Therapist Network is a place for you, and we would love to welcome you in. There's 3 tiers of membership. You can learn all about it by going to go.traumatherapistnetwork.com/join. That will take you to the waiting list. And from there, you can sign up for the waiting list and you'll receive an email with the link to register and that discount code. I hope to see you in the community.